Okay, our final paper. So, needless to say, Rick Fraser and Joan O'Malley, to use an architectural analogy, are the pillars of today's event. Rick is professor of pathology at McGill and senior pathologist at the McGill University Health Center. Most importantly, for us today, he is the director of the Maude Abbott Medical Museum, and Joan is the administrative coordinator for the museum, specializing in outreach and development. And their co-authored paper is entitled Maude Abbott, Alternative Facts and Accolades, 1868 to 2018.
Thank you, Professor Adams. It's a delight for me to be here today, especially in person. I'd like to acknowledge the following persons for their assistance in the preparation of this period, especially Mary Hurl from the Oser Library. I've been going there for months before COVID, and some of the results of the research will be presented in this paper. The Maude Abbott Medical Museum was officially reconstituted by McGill University in 2012. In September 2018, the museum opened to the McGill community and the public with newly designed exhibits. Alongside the process of the selection of specimens and artifacts for the new exhibits, curatorial texts about the museum's best-known curator, Maude Abbott, as well as the history of the museum itself were written. It was with the objective of engaging visitors with the history of the pathological and anatomical specimens, the models, the scientific instruments, and the history of the museum itself that these texts were written. It is perhaps a truism that a successful museum historical exhibit tells a good story, and we've talked a lot about narratives today. By story, I mean the catch-all term narratives that can be understood in a museum context as a mediation strategy. Narratives have a constant presence in museum exhibits. They're tools for understanding history. They can be engaging, they can be entertaining, they can be contentious, and they can be diverse. Narratives, however, are not a synonym for historical fact, nor do they appear to be constrained by historical facts. The aim of this presentation is to provide information uncovered through the archival research done in the process of mounting the new exhibits 3 years ago. I've deliberately called this information alternative facts in the sense that they often run counter to the facts that are presented in well-known narratives about Maude Abbott in the McGill Medical Museum. I will present information that deals specifically with the 5 following facts: Dr. Abbott's birth date, the existence of her medical practice and her entry at McGill University, Abbott's appointment as curator of the Pathology Museum, and the condition of the Pathology Museum in 1898. Abbott's birth date usually appears in the literature and even on commemorative plaques by the federal government of Canada as March 18th, 1869. You can see it here, the 1869. The other thing is the interest is the short biographical sketch. She was one of the first women to practice medicine and teach medicine in Canada. The short biographical sketch is typical of the other sketches we see in the literature as well. The Anglican Diocese of Montreal provided a birth certificate for Maude Abbott, which indicates here, if I can get the mouse to work again, 1,868, not 69. There are many other documents that indicate Maude Abbott's birth date as 1868. I'll start with the Canadian Census data forms. These are probably difficult for you to see. So we've got 1871, the first one, and down here you'll see Abbott, and note her last name there is Babin. Her father was Reverend Jeremy Babin. He was a cleric in the Anglican Church. Maude is here. She's 3. And the other thing of note that's interesting that I'll talk about later is Alice is 4, and their origins is French. So if I go into the 1881 census data, you can see the Abbott family here again. Note that the last name is changed to Abbott. And the other thing is that their heritage has been changed to English. They're no longer French, they're English. Again here, Abbott's qualification from the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Edinburgh indicates her birth date is March 18th, 1868. And I've looked at the Abbott documents enough to know, excuse me, that this is Abbott's handwriting. You see here, March 18th, 1868. The fact is, Maude Abbott was born in 1868. Come to fact 2, the existence of her medical practice. In her own autobiography, she says she came back to Montreal and she hung her physician's shingle at 156 Mansfield Street in November of 1897. And Abbott opened a clinic for women and children. And you can see a number of documents. This one's again from Historica Canada, which is a respectable source, often treating infants born with heart defects. This is an area map of downtown Montreal, and it's interesting because it indicates the owners of the houses and what they are. McGill University is up here, and this is Mansfield Street here. So if we get a close-up, this is 156 here. Now, it's very easy to see on these maps who owned them. This was a boarding house. Physicians at the time were licensed by the College of Physicians and Surgeons of the province of Quebec, and their names were put in registers. Maude Abbott's name, I'll show you afterwards in the register, appears, and she got her license to practice July 6th, 1898. Now, I think it would have been pretty exceptional. She was practicing medicine, and she had opened a clinic for women and children in downtown Montreal, 2 doors up from Dr. Francis Shepherd, who eventually became Dean of the Faculty of Medicine at McGill, before this date. And over the years, her licenses, I contacted the College of Physicians and Surgeons to get copies of her license. Over the years, her license always shows the address of her home, which were almost always boarding houses in downtown Montreal, or McGill University, her office at McGill University. Here again, you can see her birth date. Here you can see 1868 again. As I said, there are a number of documents, official documents that show her birth date and the date of her practice. If I come to the 1901 Canada Census data, and I know this is going to be hard for you to read, Maude Abbott's name's down here. You can see she's a boarder, and she actually boarded on the street where I live today. She moved 3 times on that street. It was always a residential street. And here, if you note, her income is $250. So this income of $250 was her income from McGill University as a assistant curator at the time. In a document requesting funds from the Guggenheim Memorial Foundation, Abbott lists her income. And no income is related to professional medical practice. And in my archival research, I couldn't find anything. Income tax reporting in Canada only started after the First World War, 1917, I believe. And it's somewhat difficult to track people's income prior to that period, but in all the documents from Maude Abbott, she never reports any income. Her licenses show boarding houses. So the fact is, Maude Abbott did not open a clinic for women and children in downtown Montreal, and there's no record of her ever having a medical practice or practicing medicine in Montreal. At the Royal Victoria Hospital, she's always listed as a medical researcher. She never had a clinical appointment. Okay. Her entry at McGill University. And again, the story goes that a few weeks after Abbott returned to Montreal, she met Dr. Adami at a meeting of the Montreal branch of the British Medical Association. Dr. Adami asked her to write up a report on a case of pigmentation cirrhosis he had presented at the meeting. And in 1898, Dr. Adami appointed Abbott assistant curator of the Pathology Museum. So here, this is the announcement in one of the journals for this meeting in Montreal. And I don't know if you can see it, but the Montreal meeting of the British Medical Association was from August 31st to September 4th, 1897. However, in late September, again, you can see here, you can see Maude Abbott's name and the name of Alice on the passenger list of the Buenos Aires arriving in Montreal in late September 22nd. So she wasn't in Montreal at the time of the meeting. In her paper on pigmentation cirrhosis, published only in February of 1900, Abbott herself gives the meeting as May. So it wasn't a few weeks after she arrived back in Montreal, it was actually in May. The story of meeting Dr. Adami, then chair of the pathology department, and the later meeting with William Osler makes for a really interesting story. There's romance, there's like sort of intrigue. But Abbott's biographical sketch in the McGill Medical Luminaries goes as far as stating that Abbott's meeting with William Osler was the most significant event in her life. Now, this is a picture from 1936, and it shows the colleagues at McGill with whom Abbott worked for over 40 years. And in her autobiographical sketch, Abbott says her best friend in the university was Dr. Charles Martin. You can see him here circled. This is, This is Charles Martin here, and this is Maude Abbott beside him. Charles Martin held many positions at McGill University, and his interest that his first appointment was that of demonstrator. At the end of his career, he was the first full-time dean of the Faculty of Medicine from 1923 to 1936. And it was Dr. Charles Martin who invited Abbott to conduct a clinical study of functional heart murmurs. And Dr. Parton mentioned this study in his presentation this morning. On so-called functional heart murmurs was read before the Montreal Medical Surgical Society in November 1898. And in this study, she documented a number of functional diastolic murmurs, a controversial issue at that time. And I think Dr. Parton said this morning, she did a statistic analysis of over 2,700 cases. And the publication following this study gained the young Dr. Abbott wide recognition in the medical community at McGill and in Montreal. This paper marked the beginning of her research on congenital cardiac anomalies, which became the hallmark of her career. It was Dr. Martin who introduced Abbott to Dr. Adami, the chair of the newly created Department of Pathology, and in less than a year after returning to Montreal in September of 1897, she was working in the Pathology Museum. She was appointed assistant curator in 1899 and curator in 1901. And these dates, they vary in the literature from 1898. It doesn't appear that she was even being paid during the summer of 1898. It appeared that she was doing the work with Dr. Martin, and she was going into the museum and as a volunteer, more or less. But they certainly appreciated the work she was doing because they sent her on a trip to the United States to devise a system of classification of the specimens. So the fact is, it was Dr. Charles Martin, Abbott's best friend in the university, who mentored Abbott and helped her launch her career in the study and research of congenital cardiac anomalies. Okay, fact 4. The position of assistant curator and curator is described in a large amount of the literature as an honorary title, low in status, limited in function to custodial, stepping stone to the prospect of an appointment to professorship and a medical teaching career at McGill. And what's often repeated is Dr. Abbott's appointment to assistant curator was inspired by expediency. Now, one possible reason why the position of curator was looked down on was because curators first entered the university as demonstrators and not as professors. Now, the denigration is a long-standing remnant of early dissecting practices in which a professor, here sitting in his chair, would read from a text, and a lowly dissector here would do the dissecting, and the demonstrator here with his rod would indicate the anatomical features. Now, a composite portrait of the Faculty of Medicine commissioned in 1882 portrays 16 bearded and mustached men, all with a countenance of gravitas. 7 of these were curators or directors of the museum at some time in their career. However, by the 1890s, the Faculty of Medicine was moving away from its Edinburgh University heritage. Lectures were decreased, and the laboratory component of teaching programs was further emphasized. By 1898, the Faculty of Medicine was growing. In just over 10 years, the student body had almost doubled. And by 1901, the medical students numbered 467. I think the only other time McGill or other universities saw this was in the 1960s with the baby booms. I know the Department of Pathology went from 200 students to 1,200 in 10 years. They had to build a new building. The Faculty of Medicine was hiring to meet this demand. It had 25 demonstrators. The anatomy department alone had 8 demonstrators compared to only 1 10 years previously. The staff grew to 20 professors and line lecturers. Abbott entered McGill in the cohort of newly hired staff as assistant curator of the Pathology Museum in 1899. A position before that time was part of the anatomy demonstrator's task. Was Abbott's appointment as assistant curator in the 1899 period one of expediency, that is to say, putting aside a troublesome woman, or with a growing student body and a changing curriculum, one of necessity? The fact is that at the time Abbott was appointed curator of the Pathology Museum in 1901, the university was in desperate need of staff. She was appointed the first full-time curator with additional teaching and research responsibilities. Fact 5. The McGill Medical Museum in 1898 again is described in the literature as uncatalogued, unorganized, useless as a resource for teaching or study, and specimens in poor condition, and generally overall chaotic. Now, the literature makes reference to the McGill Medical Museum, and even we use it today. The McGill Medical Museum is a beast that just doesn't exist. In 1899, there were actually 5 museums in the Faculty of Medicine, 5. There was a museum of pharmacy, there was an obstetric and gynecology museum, there was a museum of hygiene and public health, there was a large anatomy museum with its own full-time director, who was Dr. Francis Shepherd, and the Pathology Museum where Dr. Abbott worked. The collections in the Pathology Museum at the time of Abbott's appointment are often described as just unused and uncatalogued, in spite of abundant information that can be found in these annual announcements. Now, I must admit something. I was so desperate for reading activities in the first 6 months of COVID. I actually read 106 years of annual calendars from McGill. A reading of the announcements provide a new perspective on the history of the McGill museums and fills in an information and research gap in the history of the Medical Museum of Canada's oldest and most influential medical school. From 1852 to 1956, the announcement lists donations and provides descriptions of the museums, especially the Pathology Museum. The information includes architectural plans, illustrations, accounts of the use of the material, cataloging activities, teaching activities, and major renovations and finance to the Anatomy and Pathology Museum. This image from 1898 that probably a lot of you have seen before tells its own story. We don't have to write a narrative for this image. I'll let you judge if it looks disorganized, in poor condition, and useless as a teaching tool. The fact is that Abbott worked in the Pathology Museum. She was a pathologist, and at the time of her appointment as assistant curator in 1899, the collection of specimens was largely catalogued and displayed in an organized fashion. The picture that I showed you before, I photoshopped, and you can see what you can't see normally. You can see all the wall signs that says cardiovascular, nervous system, so it was well organized. And the collection in the museum was used extensively in teaching. I have presented information, or what I've called alternative facts, that often run counter to the facts presented in many of the well-known narratives about Abbott and the Pathology Museum. I hope this information invites open discussions on both Dr. Abbott and the history of the Maude Abbott Medical Museum. Thank you.
Definition: accolade, praise, or an award for an achievement that people admire. We're all admiring many of the things that she's been doing. And I've arbitrarily divided these into 3 different categories. One is under the academic heading, and these could be given by one's own institution or by other institutions or organizations. And then the second major heading is the public or non-academic. If you look at what could be under the academic own institution category, you can see things like honorary degree, naming of a scholarship, a medal that's named after you, even a building or a room or a square, and so on. And you can see, and I don't want you to go through these in detail, I just want you to see the breadth of how Abbott has filled all of these particular categories. I'm going to talk just for a few minutes about some of them in a minute. Secondly, other institutions. So not McGill, but wherever. Again, you could be given honorary membership in a group, you could be given a medal, a lectureship could be named after you, or you could have a scholarship or bursary named after you. There's Maude. So again, there are many places that she appears, and we won't go through all of them because we don't have the time, but this is just to give you an idea of the breadth. Finally, public. So you can have a street named after you. You can have a park, a river, or even a mountain if you're really a big shot. Bridge, obelisk, a stamp. There's Maude. So you can see that she covers the breadth of many, many accolades and awards over the years. And it's interesting, if you look at how they're given by date, she received 6 of the 25 or so that she has been given, that I've at least given her, while she was alive. There were 2 that were given essentially immediately after she died, and then none for quite a while. And then they've started to increase, and I think this is a reflection of our society now, how we tend to be giving awards both to people and naming awards after people, and that seems to be something that's happening more and more. I haven't actually researched that in detail, but that's my impression. So just to give you an idea of some of them, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I know it's very late, but if I can get the mouse to work, how do you do the mouse here? There it is. So we are located right about here, right now in the faculty club on the island of Montreal. And if you were to head off in this direction, whoops, not quite that fast, but up into the northeastern part of Montreal, you would see this, the Park Maude Abbott, which in fact doesn't exist anymore, but right next to it At the northern end, you see there is a Rue Maude Abbott. And you can also see that next to it, on the other sides of the street, is the Rue Sylvia Daou and the Rue Charlotte Tassé. This is what it looks like. There's the park. There's the street sign that proves that I'm correct. You can see that this is fairly recent. The date down below over here is 2008. That's when the street was named officially after her. Sylvia Daou and Charlotte Tassé, whom she shares the park with, were also well-known women Quebec individuals. So Sylvia Daou was one of the first women sculptors in Quebec. Charlotte Tassé was a nurse. She was hired to work in the sanitarium Albert Prévost. And when its medical director died in a car crash, she was invited to stay on, and she, in fact, turned out to run it for the next 15 or 20 years. So both of those are prominent Quebec women, and they share that place with Maude Abbott. And this is an illustration of how the awards were given to Abbott both as herself and for what she did, but as a recurring theme also as her being a woman, and often the first woman to do or to share something. Just very quickly, if you go off the island of Montreal again, but this time you go east and you go west, and you go much farther, you get to St. Andrews East, which is where Abbott was born. And in 2019, see that there was a name, Ile Maude Abbott. So Abbott lived in this small town. That's where she grew up. That's where she was initially educated. You'll notice that there is a Rue de la Gare that comes right down towards the island. And there you see it, the end of the train tracks here, coming across the North River, and that's the island that was named after Maude. At the same time, the Quebec government named Maude, and you can see her here, she's actually the very first person in this list of personnages historiques désignés du Québec. In other words, a Quebec historical famous person legend, if you want. And there's 77 people who are here. 8 of them are women. Maude is one. We've seen this plaque. Joan showed it. This was the Canadian government, not to be outdone by the Quebec government, which is always the case up here, decided that they would create an award for Abbott in 1999. And this is an obelisk that they placed outside the McIntyre Medical Building for her. Stamp, also given by the Government of Canada, in essence by Canada Post. We've seen this before as well. I'll just mention a couple of things about it that are interesting. The subject is obviously the famous Belle Eastlake painting or portrait of Abbott that was completed just before her death. You see in the background are these bricks, these gray bricks here. These are the bricks that you can see in the Strathcona Medical Building where her museum was located. And for quite a while I wondered, why are there a dozen roses down below? What do red roses have to do with the heart or Maude Abbott or anything else that she did? Well, I called the designer of the stamp and I asked him, I said, what do they represent? And he said, that's my gift to Maude Abbott. So it's a personal tribute of the designer to her. That's where they come from. Maude Abbott was a member of the Canadian Medical Hall of Fame in its inaugural inductees. There were 10 of them. She's the only woman. She founded or co-founded the International Association of Medical Museums in 2006, and she functioned as its executive director effectively for the next 30 years. And that international association became the International Academy of Pathology in 1956. And it has, this International Academy, 100 different organizations around the world. It's by far the largest group of pathologists that exist. And the largest group of that group is the USCAP, the United States and Canadian Academy of Pathology. And they have named their most important award after Maude Abbott, the Maude Abbott Lecture. Designation as the Maude Abbott Lecture represents one of the most important USCAP honors. Maude was a founder or co-founder of the Federation of Medical Women of Canada. In fact, she functioned as its chair when it was inaugurated in 1924. And when she died, there was a Maude Abbott Scholarship that they founded in her name to provide financial assistance to female medical students. And then more recently, 1990, there was the Maude Abbott Research Fund, which was established to promote the well-being of women and women physicians. Another scholarship which was given to Abbott was given before her death, 1938. See up here. This was given by an anonymous donor, and it was the remarkable sum of $10,000. And if you look at that now, in today's currency, that's about $180,000. So that's a substantial donation to the university and in Maude Abbott's name. The fund has grown to over $250,000 as of this year. And since 2000, which is when data can be retrieved, there have been 94 awards that were given for $190,000. So this is a very substantial scholarship fund at the university in Maude Abbott's name. The Faculty of Medicine has recently established the Maude Abbott Prize to be given to recognize an outstanding female faculty member, and you can see that it also has a rather substantial monetary award associated with it. This is the faculty club in which we are meeting today, those of us who are here in person. Established in 1936, it became the faculty club, and in 1985, there was the Maude Abbott room that was named, and that's just below us from where I'm speaking right now. Again, it's named after a distinguished member of the faculty and the first woman member of the faculty club. There it is. That's her room. It's a beautiful area. How could I forget the Maude Abbott Medical Museum? I can't. I won't talk any more about it because you've heard enough about it, but obviously that's named after her. And lastly, in the Strathcona building, where that museum is located, there were constructed these emblems or plaques when the building was first built in 1909. There are 3 floors, 3 main floors in that building, and there are 33 plaques on each floor. So 99 plaques in all. And as of 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, they had all been filled in by famous or well-known or who were considered to be deserving members of the McGill medical faculty. We decided that there was room for one more over here. And the museum itself today is off in this direction over here. So what we did was we had a local artisan create a mold, one of the plaques, and then put one up to Maude Abbott. And that's our contribution, meaning the Maude Abbott Medical Museum's contribution to the legacy of Maude Abbott. And I'll stop there. I could go on about some of the other awards that she's had, but I think the time is probably ready for us to stop.